The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Diversity, Inclusion, and Implicit Bias, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Amanda Ramatar, and I will be your moderator today, and I will also be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up this session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. We do not control the audio. Your devices control the audio. So if you have audio difficulties, try adjusting the volume settings on your device. If a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear, then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenters will be answering questions at the end and during the polling questions. And lastly, we have a number of upcoming webinars covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we are offering the mandatory Preventing Harassment training in English on June 20th this year. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Diversity, Inclusion, and Implicit Bias. Our presenter today is Nicole Osborne. Nicole holds a master's in Business Administration, is a certified senior professional in human resources, and is the owner of Synergize HR Consulting. As a private consultant, she works with small to mid-sized businesses and local government as a strategic partner in matters of performance management, training and development, leave management, Americans with Disabilities Act, interactive process, equal employment opportunities, and safety. In addition, she works with individuals as a job coach and expert resume writer. Throughout her career, she has provided strategic direction, thought leadership, and championed the development of initiatives to recognize and retain top talent. Thanks for being with us today, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to share my screen here and we will get started. I hope everyone is doing well today. Just before we get started, I'd like to give this quick content disclaimer that the information presented today is general in nature. It isn't intended to be an overview. It is verbal contents of the presentation are not intended to constitute any consulting or advice relationship between me or Heffernan and the attendees of this presentation. So today we're going to talk about diversity, inclusion, and implicit biases, and we want to go over high level on all these things, what they are. We will talk about what diversity is, and we will address if bias really is an issue in the workplace. We'll talk about how to move past bias and encourage others to do the same, how to foster an environment of inclusion, and then of course, I welcome any questions that you may have. So before we get started, I'd just like to take a quick pulse to see where you are at in your individual organizations. So I would like to know if your company champions diversity inclusion in all aspects of employment.
We usually like to wait until we have about 70% people who have voted, so we love everybody's participation. And, obviously we're not being graded or anything, so all answers are the right answer.
There are no wrong answers. Wherever you're at, this presentation will help you get a little bit further or help you kick off your efforts.
Okay, so here are the results. We have 25% who said true. We've got it all figured out. We have 1% who said false. We've got it all wrong. And we have 69% who said maybe. Sometimes we get it right, but there was work to do. And 5% who said, I don't know.
Amazing. So for those of you that have got a strong diversity effort in your organization, kudos to you, because it is very important. Feeling comfortable at work is something that we all want to encourage. And I think that everybody wants to feel included and part of the team, but sometimes we don't always get it right. We're going to talk about high-level things today to help you better understand where you might be at. And I know that this is definitely a crazy word cloud here about all the different things that we hear, the buzzwords, the things in the media, and it is definitely a hot topic. It has been during COVID and it continues to be now. So what are these things and what do they mean? Well, diversity is definitely about people. It's the quantitative experience. It's understanding that we are all different. If we looked around the room, we were all sitting together, we could easily see, yes, we are all in fact different, but it's not just superficial differences. We also have thoughts and feelings and programming from our upbringing that make us into the person that we are today. And those are things that we can't see. Also, there are things that are hidden, such as disabilities that you can't see with the naked eye. So we need to be aware that diversity is definitely about people, but it's definitely not just things that you can see with your eyes. Inclusion is the qualitative experience or the environment that you're in. So that is, how do people feel about your workplace? Are they excited to come to work, or do they get the Sunday scaries where they just don't want to come in on Monday morning? And that could be because you do not have an inclusive environment. Implicit bias, we've heard a lot about, and that is our unconscious beliefs that form our judgments, decisions, and our behavior. We'll talk about this a little bit more in a couple of slides, but it's kind of like your computer software or your programming. Diversity inclusion can easily become these buzzwords or acts of political correctness to check off a box, but that's not what we're aiming for. The value of diversity cannot be recognized without the component of inclusion and making sure that the environment in which you're fostering in your workplace is welcoming and accepting of all. Okay, so as far as bias in the workplace, I'm going to go over a few of these statistics, and then I'm going to show you a slide. We're going to take another poll question to see what it is exactly that you see in that slide. But just to go over this, there was a Deloitte survey in which 64% of workers felt that they had experienced bias in their workplace in the last year. And of those, 61% experienced bias in the workplace at least once a month. Now that's fairly upsetting for me to read, because that means that people feel that they're being judged unfairly in the workplace. So of the majority who felt that they witnessed or experienced bias in the past year, 83% categorized it as indirect and subtle, compared to 32% who categorized it as blatant and obvious. Now, I'm aware of both scenarios. I've investigated matters in workplaces where that is blatant and obvious, but it seems these days it gets to be a little less common. What we're really trying to talk about today is the kind that is things that you may not even be aware that you're doing that make people feel uncomfortable. So if you're all ready, I'm going to flash this image up here. Just take a quick look. I'm not going to give you a whole lot of time there, and then we're going to take a quick polling question. What did you see on that slide?
All right, we've almost gotten to our 70%. Let's need a couple more votes. I think we're going to probably cut it off now.
Okay.
Right.
I'm curious. What did we see?
like we got a lot of really good people in here. So we had 51% who said good, 2% said evil, and 47% said both good and evil.
Well, it's interesting that people saw both. I think that a lot of our brains have gotten wired if we've seen these, images in the past to look for both. We've seen probably the ones with the old man versus, or the old woman versus the young woman. This is just another iteration of that. So if you saw only one thing, I'm glad it was good. That makes it definitely a lot nicer when you're tending to see the good and not the evil. But the truth of the matter is that slide had both. So now I'm going to show you this picture. I want to talk to you about first impressions and how they often determine how we perceive another person. For example, a candidate for a position who has a very strong first impression will likely be evaluated more favorably, even if it's unwarranted. They don't have to work as hard to prove themselves. How long does it take, and what are we noticing? The science of people tell us that most people make a first impression within 7 seconds. Experiments by Princeton University research suggest that people can make judgments of others within 1/10 of a second. We use things like race, perceived sexual orientation, accent, clothing, and firmness of a handshake to tell us about warmth and even competence. Warmth, otherwise known as friendliness, helpfulness, sincerity, trustworthiness, and morality, as well as competence, otherwise known as intelligence, skill, creativity, and efficacy, are judged almost immediately. We decide if we're going to listen and synthesize the information from another person based on our impressions, and it's almost immediate. 7 seconds is all it takes. And so once we know this about ourselves, we can question these initial reactions. But if we don't learn these things about human beings, we're doomed to repeat it. Now, in this particular picture here, we see a gentleman that has tattoos, looks a little scruffy on the left, and then in the right, it's a gentleman in a white lab coat representing a doctor. Now, the fact of the matter is you've probably made the association, this is the same person. This is likely how he dresses on the weekend, and this is how he reports to work. But if we saw this person on the weekend, is our gut going to tell us that maybe this person is not as competent? Would we take medical advice from him when he's wearing his jeans and cut off t-shirt? Maybe not, but it's the same person. So what does that say about ourselves and our programming and whether we are deeming someone as credible or not? It's based on stereotypes. And stereotypes are preconceived notions and beliefs based on limited experience about what we've heard secondhand. They're seldom rational and neutral, but they often have a negative connotation. So even if the assumptions are positive, they can be just as detrimental to an individual or a group. So think about it. What are your assumptions about different types of people? What comes to mind? What do you tend to expect from them? Remember that they're non-rational or logical. How can you possibly know a person will behave in a certain way in certain circumstances? You only get to know that through direct experience with that particular individual. And even then, people can surprise you. Stereotypes are very resistant to change. Once your opinions are formed, it can be extremely difficult to change them. Don't bother with me the facts, I know better. And believe me, this is all stuff from our upbringing. It's stuff that we have to unpack. We have to consciously make these determinations about where we're getting these ideas. The thing about stereotypes is they're a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what we think becomes real. We look for certain behavior that validates our beliefs, and we just start associating with that. People start performing to the level expected of them. So if you're negative, people will give you more negativity. Stereotypes thrive on generalization with limited experience, not based on evidence, but on hearsay. And it is a two-sided coin because victims and perpetrators both have strong emotional response from stereotypes. People don't like being stereotyped, and people also don't think that they are stereotyping. But once you learn about that 7-second rule and the fact that you're making snap judgments about others, you can help try to unpack and figure out where this is coming from. So now we're looking at this picture, and these are the stereotypical representations of a used car salesman. So think about it. What comes to mind when I say used car salesman? A lot of times words come to mind like swindlers, sleazy, crooked, or pushy. Sure, there may be some dishonest used car salesmen, but the whole industry is not bad. But if we think about these stereotypes and how they're perpetuated through TV, movies, etc., how did this all get started? Well, likely someone interacted with a shady used car salesman, told their friends, and then things started becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. And now it's to the point where it's humorous and we laugh about it. But back in the younger years of my life, these were things that we didn't even examine. We didn't choose to, we just went with it. So that leads us into implicit bias. So what is implicit bias? What does that mean? And are we doing it? Are we doing it at work? Are we doing it in our daily lives? When we're laughing at an offensive joke, just reflexively, is that implicit bias? If we're thinking things about someone that's overweight and they shouldn't be eating that, is that implicit bias? What if you're having uncomfortable reactions when you see two people of the same sex showing affection or refusing to make eye contact with a young male of color? But all these things you have to examine, you have to look at it through a different lens. And when it is affecting the workplace, that's when we really have a problem. If we're hiring a younger candidate who's more familiar with technology and passing over an older candidate that is more experienced in the field, we may be missing out on something. Now, you know, there's ways through the hiring process that we can help eliminate bias, but we have to be able to question ourselves. Why are we thinking this? And is it really something that's tied to the essential functions of that job? So there was a science experiment done to test people's interpretation of visual cues. People were given glasses which turned the world upside down. They had to suffer with those upside down images for about a week or two, but after that, their brains learned to turn the images back over again so they were seeing things right side up. The same thing happens when we hear something that we know is wrong. Our brain fixes it. So given our tendency to hear what we expect to hear, it's very easy for people to come into conflict, or who are in conflict, I should say, to misunderstand each other because there's already a tense situation. Communication is strained, and people will most likely want to hide the truth to some extent. The potential for misperceptions and misunderstanding is high. And let's face it, we do come into contact a lot within the workplace and in our lives. So conflict is something that is almost like kindling to a fire. And so that's the time that we really need to step back. So we have to understand that our culture, the way that we've grown up, what we've learned, the people that have impacted our lives, that have programmed us, that's our behavioral software. So our culture is our software. And then our awareness and our knowledge, the things that we choose, are definitely things that can help us better translate that culture. All human beings are programmed by cultural software. That is something that we have to accept. It determines our behavior and our attitudes. And once we recognize what our programming is, then we have the capacity to control our choices. So it is something where you have to first understand yourself before you can understand others. And so if you don't understand where your programming comes from, then you won't have any tolerance or acceptance of other people and why they could be different from you. So now I'm going to tell you a story about this light pole here. There was a late night and a man stops in a parking lot and he drops his keys. So now he's out in this parking lot on his hands and knees, crawling around, looking for them, and he's underneath this light that was created by the street lamp. So another man walks by and stops. He's watching this man crawling around. He says, "What are you looking for? Can I help?" And the guy says, "Yeah, my car keys. Any chance you've seen him?" And he said, "Oh, well, have you dropped them around here?" And the man says, "Well, no, I dropped them over there, but this is where I'm looking." And the man says, "Why?" He says, "Because this is where the light is." So when you're looking for things about your programming and why you make the choices and the filter that you choose to see the world, it's not going to be in the light. It's not going to be obvious. Sometimes you have to go and really dissect and unpack what are these things that I learned growing up and how are they coming into conflict with the person that I want to be going forward today as an adult. So how do we move past bias? Bias causes people to rely on assumptions to inform how they read and react to various situations. The more that you're exposed to stereotypes, the stronger the unconscious association becomes. This affects our quick decision making, those who have to be made right away. That's why it's really helpful to slow things down and take time to make important decisions. How you feel in the moment isn't necessarily the answer. This goes back to science again. Back when we were in our survival instincts, we didn't have the luxury of time. When we were confronted with a saber-toothed tiger, we had to either fight it or run away. When we have to make quick decisions, we are in that area of our brain that thrives on generalizations and stereotypes. It takes time and attention to get out of that part of that brain and get into what's known as higher order thinking or our critical thinking. That's where we can analyze and question. Sometimes we get triggered and it puts us back into the fight or flight mode. We go back into that primal stance, ready to fight, blame others, and assign meanings based on our hardwiring. That is where empathy is reduced or diminished. We only are thinking about ourselves. We're being selfish. I have a person in my family who is transgender and identifies as non-binary, which means they don't view themselves as either male or female. They've asked the family to use they and them pronouns when referring to them. This didn't feel normal to me because in the English language, they and them refers to multiple people. I was complaining to someone about how hard it was for me to remember to use the correct pronouns when referring to my sibling, and I got called out. My friend said, "Wow, that must be really hard for you." And I said it was. I thought this person was empathizing with me. And then my friend said, "Have you ever stopped to think how hard it is for them?" Well, obviously the discomfort I felt with remembering to use the correct pronouns was far less in comparison to what my family member likely feels being transgender and different. Once you understand the situational nature of stereotypes and bias, you can learn to have power over it. That puts you back in the higher, more complex thinking region of the brain. So what if? What if you're evaluating a job candidate to lead a new office? On paper, this is by far the most qualified person you've seen. Her responses to your interview questions are flawless. She has impeccable social skills. Still, something just doesn't feel right. You can't put your finger on it. You just have a sense. Do you hire them? So we're going to do a polling question, and let's see what you have to say.
Okay, we're almost at our 70% mark. All righty, we're there. So I'm going to go ahead and close the polling question and share the results. So we have 17% who said no, I'm going to go with my gut. 48% said yes, I'm going to give her a chance, and 35% said I don't know.
So I really respect the I don't know answer. And the reason why is because our gut could be wrong, or we need to unpack that more. I used to work for a government and a social services department. In the area where I live, we're very diverse culturally. I feel that it's a huge blessing because I've learned about different areas of the world without ever having to leave home. However, not everyone was used to seeing it that way. And I worked in a welfare, fraud, and civil rights program, which was a very interesting combination. I had an eligibility worker make a referral to me for fraud based on their assumption that the person was being deceitful. When I called them in for more information, I asked them exactly what happened that made them feel that the client was lying. They told me, Nicole, they wouldn't make eye contact. Whenever I asked them a question, they were looking at everything but me, the door, the floor, the ceiling. Every time I tried to make eye contact, they looked away. I said, that was very interesting. And then I asked them, by any chance, did this person appear Asian? And they said yes. Our community has a very large Hmong population. And I know from working with civil rights that in that culture, not making eye contact is a sign of respect. This person was likely showing the government worker respect by refusing to make eye contact. Of course, this was perceived very differently by someone from a culture where direct eye contact is a sign of honesty. So those are the types of things that you really have to ask yourself, where is this coming from? So now what? Awareness is not enough. You have to do something about it. And the work has to be conscious and it has to be intentional. We know what works when it's evaluated. In ourselves, we can continue to test it. So it's helpful to have people to bounce things off of. It's helpful to bring other people into the decision-making processes if you don't already. It's helpful to have a representation of diverse audiences in which you associate with. It's more than awareness. You have to do the work. So what are some strategies? Okay, so we have lots of them. Number one, identify any instances where implicit bias may be impacting your behavior, and then try to be specific, like always baking with your daughter and playing basketball with your son. There's a lot of sons that like to play with things that are non-traditional for boys or vice versa. But sometimes in the way that we present things to our kids, it is putting those biases in their head without us really even examining that. Another thing you can do is act friendlier. Behavior influences your thoughts. And if you're friendlier around people that you're not comfortable with, it helps them break the ice and get to know you, and you can develop a real meaningful relationship with that person. Be aware of your positive stereotypes as well as your negative ones. The positive ones may seem harmless, but they can still register as offensive to those on the receiving end. Hang out with people with expanded viewpoints. Human beings are definitely attracted to what's same or similar to them by nature. But if you push yourself out of your comfort bubble and try to hang out with new people, you'll learn. You'll learn more about cultures, about different ways of thinking. And to me, it's very exciting work. You can expose yourself to media that helps break down prejudice. So there's a lot of media out there that reinforces stereotypes. Be aware that what you put in your head is what's going to come out of your mouth. Make your circle bigger. Have positive contact with equal status, with people working together. If it's in a subordinate relationship, that might be a little bit difficult, but look for colleagues that are diverse from you, that have different ways of working, different ways of seeing the world. And then finally, what I consider to be number one is try not to make quick decisions. Slow down, take time, use algorithms, examine where your reactions come from, ask the questions. So another tool that we have here is, what should you do if you have to fact check yourself? The best thing to do is ask questions instead of assigning your own meaning. Most people will not be offended if you genuinely want to understand and you watch your tone. Don't accuse, don't blame, and watch your body language. Start with something that shows your desire for wanting to learn, like, hey, I noticed when we were talking, you don't look me in the eye. The way that I was raised, that's a sign of dishonesty, but I don't want to assume anything. Can you tell me why, when we're talking, you don't like to look directly at me? Sometimes this will go well, sometimes it won't. But just because it backfires once does not mean you give up. You keep trying. In the meantime, keep positive intent in mind. Stay curious, ask questions, and as you do this, you become a role model. Every situation will not be easy. Sometimes there will be misunderstandings. If others see you as someone who's willing to try, they'll be more likely to try too. But you have to infuse this in your culture, and it starts with you, and then it permeates out to others. You have to be willing to sometimes make mistakes. Sometimes it is uncomfortable. Sometimes it hurts your ego. But if you don't do that work, then other people aren't going to do it either. So confronting bias in the workplace. Okay, so now we've learned how to identify and address our own biases. How do we confront bias? And really not just in the workplace, but any situation. How should we respond when we recognize and witness someone making an offensive comment? Well, obviously it depends, right? It depends on what it is, who said it, who they said it to, and what circumstance or environment you're in. Speaking from a place of an ally and someone with privilege, I need to start off by saying that in order to respond appropriately, we have to be able to recognize a microaggression, which is what we are talking about. Those are things that are comments made on bias, and ultimately we need to be able to disarm this and stamp it out. So as you already know, the person who makes the remark is usually unaware that they've made an offensive comment. So what do you need to do to make it visible to them? Maybe this can be done immediately, and maybe it needs to wait until a later time when you're on a one-on-one basis with that individual. If it needs to wait until a later time, you can disarm the microaggression by steering the conversation away from the remark or the joke to communicate that it's offensive. You'd be modeling a good behavior to the other people present, and then you can have a conversation later with the person who made the comment. When you don't respond to the bias, whether it be immediately or later, you want to come from a place of education. You want to keep it about the impact the comment had and not the intent of the comment. Impact supersedes intent. You can't prove intent, so you'll always lose that argument. How many times have you said to someone that what they said was offensive and they responded with, well, that wasn't my intention at all. Why are you so sensitive, or something similar? Focusing on the impact is an easier way to get the person to understand what happened and how it might have caused the other person pain or grief. Another way is to get someone to understand what they said may be coming from a place of bias is ask them to be specific. This is something that may come up with work more often, like in hiring committees or deliberations about a candidate, or even in friendly office conversations. Okay, so now we're going to talk about inclusion. Inclusion is the practice of providing everyone with equal access to opportunities and to resources. It's giving everyone an opportunity to be successful. Efforts include creating opportunities for historically marginalized groups as a means to be equal in the workplace. Companies with more ethnically and gender diverse executive teams are more likely to outperform their competition. And Glassdoor found that 76% of employees and job seekers consider diversity an important element of their workplace, which affects recruitment and retention. I do a lot of hiring committee work, and I'll tell you that that question comes up a lot these days. You may have noticed that as well. Candidates want to know, is this a company that values diversity? Is it someplace that I can go and feel included? So inclusion comes from the top down. Any organization that's going to work on being inclusive needs to start with the leaders first, and there has to be buy-in. Human resources cannot do this alone. This work has to be strategic, and it has to be intentional, and it has to be a priority. Even when we set out on this journey together, there are going to be things that make people uncomfortable. For instance, I was approached by a transgender team member who asked for trash cans in all the stalls. Men, women, all of them. Recognizing the need, I jumped into action only to be questioned by a senior leader who didn't understand the urgency or the importance. It had not occurred to them that a transgender man may need someplace to discreetly put sanitary products. Once I explained this, the senior leader was more than supportive, and we got those trash cans installed that same week. But if someone doesn't understand what it is and the impact on other people, then they can't make a good decision. So you have to stop. You have to ask yourself, is this a teachable moment? Is this an education thing? And if you understand the urgency of the situation or the importance, then you need to be that person that's able to step in and provide that education. This is something I hear a lot. Well, we can't give some employees special treatment. What I want to tell you is all employees deserve workplaces that enable them to feel welcome and do their best work. Characterizing accommodations as special treatment reinforces the stigma for individuals with disabilities by describing their needed accommodations as a burden or exception to the rule. Okay? Not everything has to be the same. And when I came into a recent workplace and I tried to make that point, it was a very, very new concept for them because the previous HR person had told them that you have to give everybody the exact same thing. Well, that's not exactly what it is. So I want to show you this illustration that you may have seen before, the difference between equality and equity. On the left, you see equality. This is something where everyone has been given the exact same thing, but it didn't really have the intended effect, did it? Because the tall person didn't need that block to begin with. The person in the middle is basically exactly the same place as they were before. And then the person that is having trouble seeing over the fence because of their height wasn't given enough. So when we spread it out and give people what they actually need, we move from equality to equity. And that's what we need to focus on, is making the situation to where it is equitable and not necessarily equality. So I want to give you some tools for awareness. Okay. There is things that we have to understand, that culture is experiential and it's experience based. So it doesn't grow in your skin or your hair or where you're born. You have to challenge your assumptions. You have to check your reality. You have to be flexible. This is something I've said for a long time, which is assume positive intent. Most people don't get up in the morning thinking, how can I offend people today? Now, I've been in HR for a long time, so I do know for a fact that there are some people like that, but they're minimal, and you can't expect that that's always going to be the situation. Generate multiple interpretations. Okay, so if the arms are crossed, there's a lack of eye contact, there's nodding, those can all mean different things in different cultures. So is it really a difference that makes a difference? When considering individuals of differing age, gender, ethnicity, education, does it matter? Could they have a good idea? Can they lift that 20-pound box or 50-pound box? Should I offer to shake hands? Should they get that promotion? Does their paperwork have priority? There are certain circumstances where we have to keep it based on the essential functions. So in the example of, can they lift that box? If it is an essential function and they have to be able to do something, then yes, you're going to have to treat that as such. But there's other things that have to do absolutely nothing to do with the essential functions of the job, and they're cultural based, and things can be shifted or changed in a different way to help that person be able to do their job. So I want to talk to you real quick about this. Maybe some of you have seen this before, but if you haven't, this is a wonderful tool. It's called the Harvard Implicit Bias Test. And these tests they have are not just race, religion, gender, or anything like that. They have things that based on weight or whatever. There's, I don't know how many of these different tests, but they're all free. And you can go in there and take them and find out for yourself where some of these biases lie. Each test takes about 10 or 15 minutes to complete. So you log in, pick the test that you want, and then it's going to measure your reaction time between the two different things. So say, for instance, we're checking to see if there's a preference between white and black. So the first set will all be associated with white being good and black being bad, and it measures your reaction time, and then it switches. And then black is good and white is bad, and then it is able to scientifically come up using their algorithm to find out if you have an unintentional bias in that area. So I really encourage you to go in here and check this out. It's a wonderful tool. It helps you learn, and you can share this with others. Remember what I said earlier. You first have to understand yourself before you can understand others. So here is a quote I've used for a long time. Be not the slave of your own past. Plunge into the sublime seas, dive deep and swim far so that you come back with a new self-respect, with new power, and with an advanced experience that shall explain and overlook the old. This is work that you have to do for yourself. When I have taught this class in person, we do an exercise, which I'll explain to you real quick so that if you want to do it, you can. And that is basically making a wheel with yourself in the center, and then all the different spokes that come out of that. And you can sit and think about all the different things that you were taught as you were younger and where those programming came from. So for instance, you know, my dad taught me my work ethic. My mom told me to, you know, always be kind and gentle and kind of be a people pleaser. And then, you know, through media and TV and all those things, I was taught different things. School, I was taught different things. You know, I had experience in the Girl Scouts. Those taught me different things. After you've outlined all these different things, then you can sit and examine where those things may come into conflict. And then you can ask yourself, do those things really suit me going forward, or these things that I can dump? It's amazing when you have those aha moments. It's like, okay, I finally understand where some of this stuff is coming from. So it is empowering work. And then you can encourage that in your teams to do the same work, share this information with them, give them the tools. If people don't have the tools in their tool belt, they don't know how to adequately respond to things. So if all you've ever really known is how to use a hammer, then every problem you encounter is going to be a nail, and you're going to try to hammer it. But you also need a wrench, and you need a level, and all the other tools that you can put in that tool belt. And then you can situationally look and examine what tool is needed for this particular scenario. So now I'd like to go ahead and open it up to questions, comments. Let's hear what you're thinking.
At the moment, we don't have any questions that have come in, but that doesn't mean we won't have a couple trickle in. I didn't know if maybe we should hang on for a little bit, or what would you like to do, Nicole?
Sure. Well, I definitely would be happy to answer any questions. I've been doing this work for a long time. I have lots of experience with HR, and I'm happy to share that with you. So if you have any burning questions, now's a great time.
Sure. We actually did just have somebody who asked if you could share the link to the bias test, which I believe must have been on the third to last slide, the Harvard Implicit Bias test.
I think I just lost my PowerPoint. Hang on one second. Let me see if I can navigate this back.
So I could actually share this link when I send a follow-up email to everyone as well. So don't feel like this is the last opportunity.
Can you see it again?
Yeah.
So this link is https://implicit.harvard.edu and then /implicit /research.
Awesome. So I'm thinking that if anybody has any questions following the presentation, do feel free to email me. Like I said, I'll be sending an email afterward, and so you guys can respond to me, and then I'll forward your questions to Nicole. I actually do have a couple coming in right now, so let's actually let's attend them. Let's attend to them. Okay. So, what trainings do you recommend for managers regarding DEI?
So I don't have any specific trainings that I recommend, but I would look for things that help people better learn about themselves. I would try to avoid things that are just the buzzwords and checking boxes. Awareness level training is great to start off with, but you have to really do the work to re-examine where these things are coming from so that you better understand why you've made some of these connections and formed these stereotypes and beliefs over your entire life. So you can't unwind things that easily. If you've got X amount of years of programming, it's going to take just amount of time, a lot of time to unwind that. But you learn to start making adjustments based on your level of comfort with the subject matter. So just like when you're working in a Windows-based program and you're going to send a document to somebody that is using an Apple computer, you can make adjustments so that they can open the file. But if you don't know that and you just send it, then you're going to get an email back that says, sorry, I can't open this, or I don't have the program. So it's learning that people are going to need a certain amount of buffering to make this work really intentional in their lives, and giving them the space to practice. So webinars are great. Don't get me wrong, I just did one. But if you can do this work with a live facilitator, it's a lot better. People will be more open to asking questions. They can stay after and ask their questions in private. A lot of people get uncomfortable because this is touchy. This is who you are as a person, and it hurts your ego sometimes when you have to admit that, oh my God, I've been doing it wrong. So if you can do that work in person, I do recommend that.
Awesome. And we do have quite a few questions that are coming in now at this point. So here's a good one for you. How would you address the CEO if you feel he is being preferential to males?
So it's touchy. Sometimes you have to handle this with a feather glove. But I would ask him or her, I've noticed that you tend to give a lot of weight to the male candidates. Is there something that you're seeing that I'm not seeing, and can you explain that? I would just ask a lot of questions and try not to put that person on the defense, because when you put them on the defense and they feel like they're getting in trouble or they're doing something wrong, then they're going to be less likely to examine themselves or be honest with you about what they're seeing. So I would just approach it very lightly and say, I've noticed that we're, picking a lot of male candidates. Is there some reason why you feel that these candidates are more qualified that I'm missing? Explain to me. I'm confused. I need clarity. Just getting people to talk. And then, saying diplomatically, I feel like we need to give more opportunities to people who are not male. See what they say. It's about conversation.
Perfect. So we have another good one. How would you suggest a small company where there is predominantly Caucasian individuals start addressing DEI?
Well, again, I think it really starts with understanding yourself, and you could do some level of awareness training to let people know that the impact of diversity. You could use some of those statistics that we started with and how it helps businesses get ahead and be more competitive and stay relevant in a changing market by bringing in different viewpoints from people that come from different backgrounds and walks of life. A lot of times you'll get pushback because they'll say, well, we all are different. Just because we look the same on the outside doesn't mean we have to go recruiting for a certain ethnicity or whatever. And that, is partially fair. But we all have similar experiences if we are white, meaning that we have had a certain amount of privilege. I can be undetected in a lot of ways. People don't really know what I think. They'll tell me things thinking that I'm going to agree with them because I look white. And then when I open my mouth and let them know that that's not how I think, sometimes they're surprised. So you don't really know where people are at. You'd have to take the temperature in your organization and kind of see, where are the pain points and where are people going to push back. So, you might want to just start off small with some awareness and helping them understand the value of bringing a more diverse workforce together and how that's going to help your company get ahead. People really get tuned in on the why, and people tend to be very focused on the bottom line. So if you can tie those two things together, you can help shape that argument.
So I don't know if I'm asking this question properly, or maybe I missed something, but was there a term that you used called ally, A-L-L-Y? And if so,
yeah, an ally.
Oh, okay.
Sorry. There is a term called ally, and that means that somebody that's not necessarily in that subgroup of people, but still advocates for them, and still, understands their experience and helps basically be a translator to people outside of that. So say, for instance, in the LGBTQ community, you may not be gay, you may not be transgender, but you can still be an ally for them if you understand some of those things that impact them and speak up for them. So an ally is somebody that helps advocate for a marginalized group and really commits to understanding their experience, even though they haven't experienced it themselves.
And I think this individual just wanted to know if you had any resources or where they could learn more about it.
So there are a lot of resources, but I tend to always push people towards this Harvard implicit bias test first, just because it's very eye-opening. There's other things within colleges and universities. They tend to have a lot of curriculum developed, and a lot of times they'll be happy to share it with you for free. So you may want to reach out to any university in your area and see what kind of resources that they may be able to assist you with. Bringing in subject matter experts from the community is also really helpful. You can contact different communities that you want to learn more about. Ask them to come and give an informational seminar or topic. Just we do what is known as fireside chats, where we invite different people from the community in to talk to a leader within the organization, and then we invite staff to come and listen. So that's a great way to just listen to a conversation and, you know, really hear what both sides have to say.
How should we approach employees who let bias control their behavior towards their subordinates, but refuses to acknowledge such biases and actively refuses to talk about them?
So what you're looking for is a behavior change. And so that can be difficult because people are really resistant to change. You'd really have to give them some concrete examples on the things that you've noticed, and then ask them to explain why that happened. People will tend to get there quicker if they make that association themselves, as opposed to being spoon-fed or having that information crammed down their throat. So, you know, I'm noticing this, that you act this way around a certain type of people. Could you tell me more about that? And then let them think about it. They may not be able to respond right away. And then usually what I do is just give them some space and time and say, you know what, this has become something that's been brought to my attention, and I really would like to have a constructive conversation about it, but I recognize that you may not be ready to address this or see it as an issue. So why don't you take some time? We'll schedule another meeting, and then can you be ready to talk about it at that time?
What is the best way to put together a DEI statement for your company, and do you have to involve all employees?
So definitely you would want to engage different communities within your population. So bringing people to the table, you know, establishing a steering committee is a very great way to do that, or having focus groups where you just ask questions and get people to talk about what diversity means to them, listening to their experiences. I started working for a zoological society, and you know, this was someplace in the community in which I was raised, and I consider myself to be a huge advocate and proponent for diversity. But we established a diversity committee, and people were sharing their experiences. And one of the things that somebody brought up was that how they felt like the zoo birthday parties were only for white people, because back then, when I was growing up, it was very limited. You had to pay a certain amount of money to get in the door and do that birthday party. So it was limiting because the lower socioeconomic groups couldn't afford to do it. And it was like an aha moment. And I was like, why can't we make a space for people to just have like self-service birthday parties, so that if they couldn't pay to have the full bells and whistles, they could still have access to celebrate their birthday there. So those are the types of things that, you know, when you hear somebody talk and they're like, their perception is, well, I was never welcome there, I was never invited, or I couldn't get there because of a barrier, looking for ways to remove those barriers and make people be more involved. So I would say conversations, dialogue, and listening more than you're talking.
We have about 5 more questions. Are you happy to go until 11 o'clock?
Sure, no problem.
How do you recommend we best approach applicants, since we don't necessarily know how they prefer to identify he, she, they, or them?
Well, you know, that's a great question. And this is something that I've been saying for a long time, is that maybe we should start moving to a more gender neutral language just all across the board. So, you know, in trainings and things like that, I try to just use they and them. And when I'm referring to people, if I don't know how they like to be addressed, I usually just stick to they and them because it's gender neutral. With candidates, you can always ask. I don't think anybody will be offended if you say, how do you prefer to be addressed? Or which pronouns do you prefer? If they, you know, are cis gender and they're, you know, how they present themselves as how they feel inside, it would just be like, well, okay. But if it's a person that is not, doesn't look like how they feel inside, that could mean the whole entire world to them. So, I would go that extra mile to just ask. And that's something in healthcare that we encourage too, with doctors and nurses seeing patients, is to ask them, how do you like to be addressed? Some people like to be addressed more formally. Some people are okay with a first name basis. Same thing with gender.
This person said, I love the Harvard implicit bias test. When a person identifies their bias, how can we as an employer help them to overcome these bias? Is there some written materials that we can offer the employee?
So, there are a lot of tools. Again, I would probably reach out to your university or college that's in your area and see if they have things that can help, like tools. I don't have anything off the top of my mind right now that I could really throw out there, but most work sites also have consultants and different things that you can bring in. So you might just want to check and see what you have available contractually, and then who might be available in your area. You can reach out to community-based organizations also that work with different marginalized groups and ask them for resources. They're usually happy to share. Anything that was made with government money is accessible to the public, so you could check government websites, local government or state government level, and see if there's things there as well. Those are just some of the ideas that are coming to my mind, but you would just basically have to take a look around and see what you can get your hands on.
Someone said, we are currently doing employee evaluations. One of the questions posed in the questionnaire is focused on communication and asks about proper grammar and punctuation. Would this be considered an educational bias?
So it could be. I would probably focus more on giving people tools and equipment to do better with spelling, punctuation, and grammar than trying to rate them down in an evaluation. But if you put them on a plan to help them improve and you give them the training and the tools, then you can use that as a benchmark for improving. And I would focus on that effort and not necessarily on how fast they get there, but as long as they're trying. Because there is a lot of people that are there are a lot of people that are educated that have just as much trouble with grammar as people that are uneducated. I wouldn't make any assumptions just based on what you're seeing with grammar. I've seen a lot of questionable documents come from people that have degrees. So, just maybe focus on giving tools and resources more than trying to ding them on the issue itself.
So previously I had asked you regarding the CEO and their preference to males. So someone asked, would you suggest the same response action to that type of situation where racial bias might be taking place instead?
Yeah, it's always going to end up being a conversation, and then you're going to want to ask more questions than dictate. You can tactfully point out what you're observing or what you've noticed and ask them to explain it. There are people in the world that do not want to change their mind and have a very fixed and rigid mindset about the world. And in that case, it's going to take a lot of seeds that you have to plant over time before you're really going to be able to have an honest conversation about what you're seeing. And when you're talking about a CEO or somebody that's in charge, you tread lightly, because if you want to keep working there, you don't really want to make an enemy in them. So, you may just throw out a couple little seeds here and there about, I just went to a great training that, said that diversity is very impactful on the bottom line, and just let that sit. Don't give them any more information. And then another time mention something else about it. Did you know that companies that, work to be more diverse or more productive, and just over time through dialogue, maybe you'd be able to get into a more honest conversation. But yeah, you do have to tread lightly sometimes.
Okay, and I think this is going to be the last question before we wrap it up. So to anyone who I haven't addressed, please note that I'll probably follow up in an email with you. And if I don't follow up, do reach out to me directly. You'll have my email when I send the follow-up email. And to everyone who's been asking if these slides are available, yes, they are available on the Heffernan website. That website will be sent in the follow-up email, so you will have that information afterward. And so to our last question, this individual said, our workforce is primarily people who speak Spanish natively. Our regulations under the Department of Social Services is to speak English around the clients. How do you manage this when the staff speaks Spanish when they should be speaking English?
So you would need to focus on if clients are present, I would not try to impose English speaking between the staff. That has come up before in my workplace, which was a heavily unionized workplace, I might add. And so, I really had to coach managers and supervisors that it's okay if they're on their break or lunch or even sitting at their desks, but they're just conversing with each other, to let them have their conversations in their native language and to focus on explaining to other people, especially those that want to come and bring a complaint, that you don't have to jump to the conclusion that they're talking about you just because they're not speaking in a language that you can understand. But if your policy is that they use English with the client, the public, or whatever, then I would just focus on during those times, and it would be a coaching and a counseling in private.
Awesome. Well, thank you for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will send information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. Thank you, Nicole, for your time and expertise today. We hope all of the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of time. Please be sure to join us on February 21st for our Employment Law Update webinar. Thank you and have a safe day, everybody.
Thank you.